My other four city councilors, like, you know, so that, like, talking about easement. Well, yeah, we are. Well, so we haven't changed it. Ready to go. Just in the back of the old on the shelf. I call him for people who know about this. I mean, we had a 30-year-old world. City charge. We wanted it. Yeah.
Okay, can everybody kind of get to your seats? I'm going to read some instructions and then we'll pause for a couple minutes to make sure everybody who has signed up to give comments has had a chance to do that. And then we'll record and call people up. Okay. So, and I'm going to read a script so that it's crystal clear what's going on here. My name's Laura Hart. I will be serving as the hearing officer for the Oregon Water Resources Department. The purpose of this hearing is to take public comment on the proposed rules in OAR Chapter 690, Divisions 8, 9, 300, and 410. The groundwater allocation rulemaking will adopt, amend, and repeal rules pertaining to the allocation of new groundwater rights. Any final rules will be adopted by the Water Resources Commission. I will not be responding to questions, as my role here is to take public comments on the proposed rules. The department will review comments made during the public comment period, and a subsequent staff report will address issues raised by your comments. In addition to the opportunity to present oral comments at this hearing, anyone may submit written comments by 5 p.m. on May 31st, 2024, which is the close of the public comment period. Comments received after that time will not be reviewed or considered by the agency unless the agency decides to extend the public comment period for everyone. Each person who wishes to comment at this hearing, please sign up or do so on the sign up sheet, which I have up here. During the hearing, I will call each attendee who wishes to comment in the order in which that attendee is registered to comment. When I call your name, and I'm going to ask, I'm going to call two names and have you kind of queue up here so we can keep things moving. Please come forward, state your name and where you are from. If you represent an organization, please identify the organization as well. You may then provide your comments. If you have written material to enter into the record, please say so and try to summarize the material rather than reading it. Please hand me a copy of the written material if you have not already submitted it to the agency. Please turn off all cell phones during the hearing. The hearing will be recorded. Let's see. Let me just ask. So currently we have, let's see, we have about 17 folks that wish to give comments. Has everybody signed up that wishes to provide comments? Okay. Okay. So based on the fact that we've got about 17, I think we can give everybody 4 minutes. That should get us out of here on time if everybody can keep their comments to 4 minutes. So let me see what time it is now. So I'm going to start the hearing. I guess I'll start it in 2 minutes. So I'll start at 7:05 since we didn't have anybody that needed to comment or add their name here. I've got Phil Chang and Paul Lipscomb on my list first. So if you could kind of make your way to the seats here, and then we'll start. And we're recording now. So we're just going to continue to record. Okay, well so we may need to cue the next person would be Mayor Fitch. Okay, so and I have a little bit more to read here as we get started. Got 1 more minute. I said 7:05, so I'm going to stick to 7:05. Okay, this hearing is now in session and is being recorded. My name is Laura Hart and I am the hearing officer. Today is April 4th, 2024, and the time is 7:05 p.m. Purpose of this hearing is to provide an opportunity for public comment on the proposed rules in OAR Chapter 690, Divisions 8, 9, 300, and 410. In addition to presenting oral comments at this hearing, anyone may submit written comments until 5 p.m. on May 31st, 2024, which is the close of the public comment period. You may send comments to Laura Hart at Oregon Water Resources Department, 725 Summer Street Northeast, Suite A, Salem, Oregon, 97301, or email wrd_DL_rule-coordinator@water.oregon.gov. That information is also on the FAQs and fact sheets out front. So that might be an easier place to grab that. Comments received after 5 p.m. on May 31st, 2024 will not be reviewed or considered by the agency unless the agency decides to extend the public comment period for everyone. The department will not respond to questions during this hearing. Okay, so now we're ready to begin and we'll start with Phil Chang.
Good evening. I'm Deschutes County Commissioner Phil Chang. Thank you for your efforts to address declining groundwater levels around the state. Here in the Deschutes Basin, we have witnessed significant declines in the last 2 decades. I've seen hundreds of domestic wells go dry in the last 3 years alone. But we need to do more to address groundwater declines than these rules. And that needs to be grounded in an understanding of why groundwater levels are declining here. The best available science indicates that declining precipitation is the major factor behind groundwater level declines in the Deschutes Basin. You heard that from Justin. Groundwater pumping is the next most important factor, and piping of irrigation canals has some localized impacts as well. We can't control precipitation levels, but we can think about how much groundwater we pump and how we use it in order to address declining groundwater. The Deschutes Basin is pretty unique in Oregon in that most of the groundwater usage is for municipal and residential purposes. In many other basins, agriculture is the major use of groundwater, and reducing groundwater use can often be accomplished by working with a relatively small number of users. But to free up groundwater to accommodate future growth in the Deschutes Basin, we will need tens of thousands of current groundwater users to conserve and become more efficient. To speak to this rulemaking, restricting new groundwater permits in this basin may help keep groundwater level declines from accelerating, but it will not, this new rule will do little to help slow or reverse the declines we are experiencing. To seriously address groundwater declines here, we need tens of thousands of groundwater users to become more efficient and to run their households and businesses with less. We also need any new users and growth to be as water efficient as possible. Municipal customers and farmers can look to their water utility or the NRCS to get technical assistance and incentives to conserve water. But we have over 16,000 exempt domestic wells in Deschutes County, and I do not know of any agencies or systems that encourage or support water conservation for those groundwater users. We also need new households to be water efficient. As a general rule, new homes within cities are more efficient than new rural residences because of lot size, irrigated area, and municipal programs to encourage efficiency. So the Deschutes Basin needs the state's help to improve the efficiency of domestic well households and to encourage new homes to be as water efficient as possible. Please proceed with this rulemaking in ways that encourage future growth to occur within incorporated cities. Please also consider development of programs to encourage and support conservation retrofitting of exempt well rural residences. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ed Fitch. I'm the mayor for the city of Redmond. I'm afraid all the hard work associated with this rulemaking effort will be frustrated and short-lived by either a court decision or legislation or both. One of these or both will or should occur because the proposed rule fails to account for the significant differences in the geologic conditions of each basin. The commission and department have embraced contradictory positions. The WRD infers on its website that the decline in the aquifer is solely because of excessive pumping. That may be true in another basin, but is certainly not a correct statement regarding the Deschutes Basin. In the Deschutes Basin, there is currently a 200 cubic feet per second cap on non-exempt, on groundwater permits that are not exempt. But there's a recharge of the aquifer at a rate over 4,000 cubic feet per second. The general consensus on the basin, as has been indicated before, is that this decline is based on climate change, piping, and pumping. But the decline is also based upon an artificial benchmark, as this aquifer has received over 100 years of artificial recharge by the canals in our area. The Water Resources Department claims there's no water available for municipalities, but allows billions of gallons of water to be pumped out of our aquifer each year by exempt wells. And the WNRD and the state of Oregon will continue to allow more wells outside of urban areas instead of providing access to water for growing cities. All of this is not even the most significant flaw with the proposed rule. The main problem is that the rule is being adopted in a legal vacuum. Both the commission and the department have a statutory and a regulatory obligation to, one, prioritize use for human consumption, and two, comply with the statewide planning goals and assist state and local jurisdictions to comply with those goals. Those goals include Goal 9, which requires cities to plan for adequate land and public services for economic growth and development opportunities over the next 20 years. Goal 10, which requires cities to provide adequate housing. Goal 11, which requires cities to provide public services, including water service, and plan long range for those service needs. And Goal 14, which requires cities to plan for increased urbanization. The requirement to comply and assist is set forth in the Commission's own administrative rules, which have been ignored with this rulemaking. For example, in OAR 690-005-0020, the Commission notes that the land use and water management are integrally related. Statewide planning goals require comprehensive plans to include inventories of and mechanism to protect important local water resources. State law requires the Commission to protect the public interest of all waters in the state, but recognizing that responsibility is vested in both the local and state government to manage and protect water resources. And the Commission places a high priority on complying with statewide planning goals and achieving compatibility with comprehensive plans. It also notes in OAR 690.005030 that except as provided in these rules, the commission department shall comply with the statewide planning goals by taking actions that are compatible with acknowledged comprehensive plans as required by law. These are not meaningless obligations for the commission or the department. Instead of working with state and local agencies, and particularly cities, the Water Resources Department has done the opposite by putting up major roadblocks for cities to comply with the statewide goals and incentivizing growth outside of urban growth boundaries with more and more unregulated exempt wells. For example, there are approximately 18,000 exempt wells in our basin that pump an estimated 9 billion gallons each year from the aquifer. Department has stated to us directly that this drawdown of 9 billion gallons a year is of no consequence. But on the other hand, the city of Redmond pumps a little over 2 billion gallons a year. Bend utilizes about 4.5 billion gallons a year to service 150,000 people together with businesses, retail, and industry. The department, however, states there is no more water for Redmond and presumably any other city in our basin. The cities are not looking for a free pass on water. We believe that mitigation instead of prohibition is an approach more consistent with state law and the commission's own responsibilities under its administrative rules. All of our cities are actively engaged in additional conservation measures to reduce the per capita consumption in our communities, a per capita number that is but a fraction of those users outside the urban areas. In sum, we believe the commission must incorporate into this rulemaking process a more balanced approach which recognizes the importance of working with cities and other water utility providers so that collectively, commission and cities and utilities can meet the requirements of statewide land use goals and provide the necessary mitigation tools to preserve the sustainability of the aquifer. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if I could get Mayor Michael Breeden and Mike Bittner up to the front here. And if you could introduce yourself and your affiliation. I think I forgot to remind folks in the last round there.
Who's up first?
I believe you are.
Oh, thank you. Hello, I'm Michael Praten. I'm the mayor of Sisters. I'm also the current vice chair and former chair of Central Oregon Cities Organization. And I'm also the co-chair of COCO's Water Subcommittee. I've been talking more about water in the last 2 years than I ever have in my whole life. COCO has been engaged in water conservation and planning in the Deschutes Basin for over 25 years. Over that time, we've worked closely with the Oregon legislature, OWRD, and the Oregon Water Resources Commission to pass bipartisan basin-specific legislative bills over the last 20 years to create a system of stream restoration and water allocation for our unique basin. The commission approved the Deschutes Groundwater Mitigation Program and other collaborative efforts in this basin since that time that have led to tremendously positive developments, and I'll give you just 4. We've increased the flow in the Middle Deschutes River 4-fold during that last 20 years. We've restored White's Creek, a key tributary for the system. We've had collaborative solutions for the Crooked River that have united local, state, and federal policymakers, and foundational funding for canal lining and piping, allowing for stream and river flow restoration. All of this only happened because stakeholders in our basin in this area have been sitting down together collaboratively for over 2 decades. A successful effort continues to this day because basin-specific data and place-based efforts have been proven to work. This method needs to continue well into the future, past the current threshold of what the mitigation program is, which is just a few years down the road. But I'd like to talk about Sisters specifically. I have to represent my people. So regarding this City of Sisters water system, we completed a water system master plan update in 2023, which has a lot of great information. And it reveals that while we have historically stayed way ahead of average daily water demand, the future looks much more uncertain. Assuming the city's growth rate coincides with the Population Research Center published values and no other changes are made to average consumption rates, the city's maximum daily demand is anticipated to exceed the design source supply in only 2028. we're growing that fast. And it includes already implemented and future water conservancy measures. So it's very concerning. Certainty for water needs to happen for Sisters, and I represent the people of Sisters. And we need to support the future growth through certainty of water for our cities. And the rules as written do not support that effort. And that's really all I have for you guys, but thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Mike Bittner, Utilities Director here for the City of Bend, providing some comments tonight here on behalf of the City of Bend. First, I want to just recognize the importance and need for updating these groundwater rules. I think we've all experienced groundwater level declines, extreme drought over the last several years across Oregon. And the current rules are in need of updating. They're unclear and I think leave a little bit too much to interpretation for all parties. So thank you to the department for taking up this effort to update these rules. I also want to express appreciation for staff's efforts to date and really want to highlight their accessibility throughout the RAC process. Annette, Justin, Laura, throughout this whole process, you and your technical experts were always available to us to ask questions, to have a quick conversation in between the rulemakings to really get an understanding of really where we're headed. I wish we would have agreed more, but I do appreciate the fact that you will carve out time and wanted to note that here today. This has been a really long process. I think we're going on 3 years since the initial notification that the department was going to head in this direction. Bend and my fellow Central Oregon City municipal water managers have been engaged from the start. Our support includes the white paper that we originally put together that pulled together the most relevant groundwater research completed in our basin, really to help move conversations along around the Deschutes Basin groundwater conversation and hoping that we would end up with a set of rules that works well for us. We attended all 8 RAC meetings, pushing your attendance quota, I think, a couple of times. We attended several Water Resource Commission meetings, have met with most water resource commissioners, 2 public hearings, and dozens of meetings in between to keep our leaderships, to keep our councils updated on really the current trajectory of these rules. In short, we're invested, and we've invested hundreds of hours in this rulemaking effort to date. Ultimately, we feel it was possible to develop a more effective set of rules for Oregon and the Deschutes Basin specifically. There's a library of research on Deschutes Basin hydrology that could have been incorporated. This is outlined in the white paper I mentioned earlier. This process was long enough to include specific provisions for basins already active in place-based planning efforts. And ultimately, as you've heard already, these rules don't address the thousands of exempt wells that are largely unregulated across Oregon and have just as much of an impact as many of the water users that are targeted through these rules. We value the opportunity to create basin-specific groundwater management tools as is outlined in these draft rules. However, I want staff and the public to know that this is a long and uncertain path with zero guarantees for municipalities. The fastest growing cities in Central Oregon, have no clear path to water planning. There's no clear funding, guidance, or dedicated support from OWRD for us to access as we pursue basin-specific rules for our basin. And this process is projected to take 3 to 5 years minimum, I'm told, and we're told by staff from the department they wouldn't have capacity to take this up or to assist until 2027. It's simply unworkable for us. Ultimately, and perhaps most importantly, this coincides with the 2029 sunset of the Deschutes Basin Groundwater Mitigation Program. Deschutes Basin cities have invested millions of dollars into this program over the years. This program or some form of it needs to continue to allow movement of water within the basin. Our ratepayers are depending on it. Ultimately, we need predictable yet nimble rules to navigate an uncertain path forward that's filled with variables outside of our control. You've heard climate change, you've heard artificial recharge, exempt wells. Those are all things that are outside the scope of these rules. We as cities have clear mandates for providing enough buildable lands, as you've heard. We have to meet the water demands of those buildable lands. Some Central Oregon cities like Bend are navigating new obstacles, such as the state mandated housing needs analysis and the new legislative rules for climate-friendly and equitable communities for cities over that 50,000 people. Ultimately, these draft rules do not adequately consider the fiscal impacts to cities, municipal water providers, or our customers, only further adding to concerns around affordability in our communities. So here's what we need moving forward from OWRD. We need commitment from OWRD leadership that water certainty for Central Oregon cities will be a top priority in the future. Municipal water providers like myself, Redmond, Bend, Sisters, shouldn't be required to navigate this level of uncertainty given the existing regulations already around water management and conservation plan that we're subject to. We need certainty. We need certainty on the future of the Deschutes Basin Groundwater Mitigation Program. We need assurances from OWRD that this program or some form of it will continue. Again, our ratepayers are depending on that program moving forward. And lastly, and I'll end with this, we need funding. We need funding for water supply projects. We need funding for water conservation programs. We need funding for water affordability programs for our customers. We can't make this shift on our own, and we need flexible funding tools designed specifically for cities and our short and long-term challenges. So thanks again to OWRD staff for all of your work to date. We really appreciate it. And Bend and other Central Oregon cities are standing by, waiting to assist moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like I've got Doug Riggs and Glenn Barrett up next.
Good evening. Thank you for taking the time to hear from the public this evening. For the record, my name is Doug Riggs, the Central Oregon Cities Organization. I'm here to back clean up for this august group that has gone before me, and I will try not to repeat what you've just heard from my three colleagues. I do want to emphasize that the nine cities of COCO have been working to be responsible stewards of water in this region for almost 25 years. The collaborative efforts we helped establish have had tremendous successes, as Mayor Preeden have noticed. I want to acknowledge that these rules have been modified since the initial drafts and in response to earlier criticisms. However, they still implement a system that makes a dramatic U-turn and reverses course in three areas. First, over the past 20 years, the state has urged regions to take responsibility and use place-based planning processes to gather key stakeholders and work to plan for and implement change. But this proposal abandons that principle. Second, the state has urged and supported the lining and piping of canals, and this proposal needs to recognize the positive impacts and the obvious results of that principle. But this proposal fails to adequately recognize these facts and the impact that unnatural leaking canals have had on artificially driving up certain well levels. This is particularly true with the WRD's reliance on wells near the region's old leaky canals, where drops in water levels were expected as lining and piping processes took place. The problem is illustrated specifically, for instance, with the department's frequent citation of the Pine Nursery well as an indicator for this study. As a result, this proposal appears to punish the region for these beneficial efforts. The rules need to put a balanced analysis of intentional human-caused actions, which simply take levels back to natural readings, such as this, at the front of the calculations, not as an afterthought. And three, the state has, for more than 50 years, encourage careful, planned, responsible growth inside of UGBs. But this proposal actually disincentivizes that standard. As such, it abandons the principle set forth so clearly in Senate Bill 100. The impact of all these decisions is clear. In two cases, the rules will, number one, drive up water bills for residents in all the cities of Central Oregon, and two, make it very difficult, if not impossible, to meet the governor's goal of creating 36,000 new housing units throughout the state. This is backed up by OWRD's own analysis. In the report's fiscal section, it notes that, quote, ratepayers may experience higher water bills because of rising costs. Later, the report notes that the rules may force cities to update their comprehensive plans, quote, to rebalance economic priorities to achieve these goals. In other words, setting aside the goals of job creation and family wages for our residents. Cities need certainty, and as Mayor Fitch noted in detail, cities are required to respond to state housing, land use, public safety standards. These groundwater rules should not ignore these laws. Today, we'd make three recommendations. First, automatically grant place-based planning authority to regions like the Deschutes, which have existing collaborative systems in place to identify opportunities to meet water goals. Two, have demonstrated clear progress in the past decade or more, such as increasing stream flows. And three, have demonstrated a commitment to conservation, for instance, through clear city metering, cost responsibility, landscaping standards, and investments in water conservation measures. There should be an immediate opportunity to move to a place-based planning option without a 3 to 5 year alternative rule option. While we appreciate that the rules may provide a potential off-ramp for basin-specific rule, in addition, the sideboards put on that off-ramp for at least at the last minute after the 8th RAC meeting was over are unclear and unnecessary. the place-based planning option should be ramp number 1 for responsible basins. Second recommendation is that the final rules should recognize that basins which have seen almost all wells decline 10 to 20% in a 200-foot saturated aquifer are different than basins which have seen some wells decline by 3 to 5% in a 1,000-foot saturated aquifer. The rules should take that into account from the get-go. The rules should also take into account basins in which some wells are beginning to show recovery, as we are seeing here in the Deschutes. And third and finally, the rules should not disincentivize careful planned conservation-minded growth within urban growth boundaries, but instead perversely incentivize unmonitored, unregulated growth, which plays no part in the cost responsibility for shepherding water resources outside of the UGBs. That is what the current version of the rules do, and this needs to be addressed immediately and before the rules are presented to the commission. COCO is committed to supporting and providing more detailed written testimony, which is important, and we urge you to consider it. Again, thank you very much for the time. And as always, the 9 cities and Central Oregon Cities Organization stand ready to take an active role in finding real answers and science-based approaches to water stewardship in this basin. Thank you.
I'm Glenn Barrett. I'm from Bonanza, Oregon, down in Klamath County. Also represent Water for Life. In general format, as presented, I would say the rules are a little bit difficult to digest. It takes a little while to get through them. I want to thank the department for addressing the issue of existing groundwater rules or groundwater and how these affect to them. But the department indicated rules are prospective in nature and will not serve to impact existing uses. The intended application of the rules should be further clarified throughout the proposed modifications. To this end, the department may consider creating a new division within the rules to further clarify. There's several areas in the rules that depend on presumptions, and I don't think that should be as we go forward. And as far as the clarification on 690-009-0010 subsection 2, the rules apply to all wells as defined in RS 537 and to proposed and existing appropriations of groundwater. This appears to be extend existing clarification, existing uses and needs clarification. Excuse me here. So anyway, there's several areas that I think need to be further clarification on the existing uses. And again, I thank the department for taking that in consideration during the RAC meetings. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next up I have Kate Fitzpatrick and Judy Trago. Guess is that right? Hi, for the record, my name is Kate Fitzpatrick and I'm the Executive Director of the Deschutes River Conservancy. Our mission is to restore stream flow and water quality in the Deschutes Basin. We are also the state chartered temporary groundwater mitigation bank. So first and foremost, I want to commend the state on undertaking rules that are more protective of the groundwater resource. This was very necessary and from a conservation ecosystem standpoint, absolutely the right thing to do. And I feel like the staff has been incredibly professional throughout the process. So thank you. Our organization exists to restore stream flows in the river because they were over allocated over 100 years ago. So from my experience, it's much smarter to avoid these issues ahead of time than try to fix them afterwards. We do, however, think that the Deschutes Basin would benefit from basin program rulemaking. The reasons for this is in the Deschutes, the use and conservation of surface water and groundwater are intimately connected, as are the strategies to secure water for rivers, agriculture, and cities. And the opportunity to continue to work collaboratively as a basin and take a comprehensive look at all the strategies to conserve water and how to best allocate a scarce resource, both surface and groundwater, to meet these needs into the future, including thoughts about how we choose to drive growth in the area and the connection with land use would be a really important exercise. We are eager to start basin planning as soon as we can, as soon as possible.
And I'll echo some other comments that we really request state support for this process as we enter into it. Both funding, guidance, staff support, and ensuring that the process is also backed up by sound science here in the basin. So I will keep my comments short, but thank you for the effort and we look forward to continuing conversations.
Good evening. Excuse me. My name is Judy Trigo, and I'm the Executive Director for the Sisters Area Chamber of Commerce and the President of the Sisters Community Foundation. I'd like the Commission to consider the impacts on rural communities as it relates to growth and the much-needed housing that needs to be added to accommodate future growth for affordable and workforce housing. Sisters is a tourism economy, and tourism is historically known for low-wage jobs. We need to recruit and retain our current and future workforce, and these proposed rule changes will hurt our most vulnerable citizens, low-income, seniors, our weak workforce, and others who need and are relying on new workforce and affordable housing in Sisters Country. Thank you for coming this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, next I've got Mary Powell and Craig Miller.
I'm Mary Powell. I'm with the Deschutes County League of Women Voters. And we want to thank the department for being so helpful in having all these public meetings and providing a lot of opportunities for people to have their input, and also for their years of study in the Deschutes Basin, providing a lot of information on groundwater, which I hope everybody will take advantage of. The Oregon Groundwater Act was enacted in 1955, and it's past time for clear rules to protect this valuable resource that provides clean drinking water and fresh cold water discharge to streams and rivers for all life. The League of Women Voters believes that water as a resource should be managed for the benefit of the public and a sustainable habitat for all life forms. We support policies and statutes that promote comprehensive long-range planning for conservation and management of the groundwater and improvement of water quality. We believe consideration of the availability and quality of water should be an essential condition of any land use decision. We live in an arid region that is currently impacted by severe drought with falling well water tables. Some wells are failing, and the most common response is to dig the well deeper, which doesn't seem to be like the best solution if the water table is falling. I think a lot of people assume that the 1,000 feet of water table is everywhere available. And frankly, we doubt that. Out of sight and misunderstood, the water in our aquifers is being depleted faster than it's being recharged. There's potential for long-term personal and financial harm to individuals and communities, and the future of precipitation and availability in this basin is uncertain. The Oregon Water Resource Commission Department has a responsibility for ensuring access to fresh water for all life forms. We support the efforts of the department to identify regions of concern early, notify well users and managers, and implement effective regulatory measures. We support the criteria for designation of critical groundwater area. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
My name is Craig Miller, and I'm a GIS specialist for the Oregon Natural Desert Association. I'm a resident of Bend and also a landowner at Summer Lake. I appreciate this opportunity to comment on these newly proposed groundwater rules. As we learned in the information session, it's been taken almost 70 years to get around to starting to address the problem. And while it's better late than never, the lack of action up to this point has resulted in unsustainable water extraction that is already causing hardship on people and wildlife alike. I support the new groundwater rules and hope they are fully implemented as soon as possible. Putting it off would be the height of irresponsibility. Unfortunately, though, these rules will not address the overuse that is already taking place. Overuse is already creating hardship and tension throughout the state. And we can see these as cautionary tales for what we will face here in Central Oregon if we do nothing. Summer Lake Wildlife Refuge is home to a multitude of iconic bird species, including sandhill crane, American white pelican, trumpeter swan, cinnamon teal, white-faced ibis, and more than 300 other species of birds. Sensitive species such as snowy plover, Wilson's phalarope, and yellow rail breed and nest in the refuge. All these amazing wetland species are at risk of losing their habitat because of aquifer mining in the Fort Rock Christmas Valley Basin. Hydrologic studies in the 1980s have shown that these areas are connected and that diminishing groundwater levels at Christmas Valley is negatively affecting spring water flow at Summer Lake. Not only are the farmers in Fort Rock and Christmas Valley facing financial ruin as the aquifer disappears, the birds and other wildlife are facing the demise of their very existence at Summer Lake. Lake Abert is another victim of irresponsible water extraction. Its unique ecosystem has historically supported up to 20% of the world's population of Wilson's phalarope during the bird's stopover in preparation for its long nonstop migration to South America. Unfortunately, water overallocation, including groundwater, has contributed to the lake drying up twice in the past 5 years, and the phalarope is paying for it. I mentioned before that the Wilson's phalarope nests. It depends on Summer Lake for nesting and other areas too in Oregon. Just this past week, a petition was filed to list Wilson's phalarope as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. The combination of severe drought driven by climate change and irresponsible groundwater extraction will continue to accelerate even if no action is taken. The proposed water rules will provide a necessary first step in holding off this human-caused disaster, but we cannot let it be the last. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have Allison Toivola and Zach Fried. Oh, I think Allison indicated no. So
No comments, yeah.
yeah, sorry about that. Kyle, let's see, not Kyle, Neil Brandt.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm Zach Fried. I'm a hydrologist. I am the Sustainable Water Program Director for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. I am a resident of the Deschutes Basin. I appreciate and want to echo earlier comments that I'm grateful for the amount of outreach the department has done over the past several years. This has been a multi-year process that I've been engaged with since the department last rolled through the Bend area and had a public outreach meeting before the rulemaking. Since then, I've been involved in each of the rulemaking meetings, as well as some extracurricular meetings. I continue to appreciate the engagement and the commitment to public outreach that the department has shown. The Nature Conservancy strongly supports these rules, these proposed rules, because we believe that they are the best way forward for a more sustainable, more secure water future for Oregon, for both people and for nature. There are 3 things in particular that we like about these rules. The first one is that they are transparent and simple and easy to understand. They define sustainability or reasonably stable groundwater levels in a clear way using empirically derived data that was collected from across the state. These are statewide rules, but the data indicate that these thresholds will hold true, whether that's in the Deschutes Basin or the Harney Basin or the Willamette Basin. And so we appreciate the commitment to science and data that these rules inherently have. Secondly, we appreciate that these rules correctly acknowledge the interconnection between surface water and groundwater. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply in the Deschutes Basin because of the Deschutes Basin Mitigation Program, but elsewhere in the state, it's an important acknowledgement that represents a step forward in sustainable water management in the state of Oregon. And then finally, these rules leverage the precautionary principle. These rules are data-driven. They require data to show that aquifer levels are sustainably allocated before allocating additional new uses. That's important. It's not rocket science. This is not a policy decision. It's a physics problem. It represents how much water is actually available to use. And I think that the fact that these rules are agnostic to whether aquifer declines are due to climate or due to pumping, I think that's an asset, not a downside. I think that's an asset because if groundwater level declines are due to short-term droughts or short-term changes in precipitation patterns, then groundwater levels will stabilize. And then we will see in the data that there is additional water to allocate. It also incentivizes truly effective interventions that come out of place-based planning or other collaborative efforts. Efficiency efforts that represent actual gains in the water table will open up additional uses of groundwater. Finally, I think that these rules go hand in hand with collaborative efforts that the Deschutes Basin is known for, like place-based planning. As somebody who's engaged in one of the 4 place-based water planning pilot efforts throughout the state, from the very beginning, it's clear that those efforts can be used across the state to generate better outcomes that can be layered on top of rules like these in order to have place-based, community-based agency in determining a community's water future. The Nature Conservancy supports these rules and thinks it's a step in the right direction. We urge the Water Resources Department to consider that ecological responses to hydrologic alteration can occur far quicker than 25 feet total decline. In fact, some ecosystems can see significant impact to their ecological function from as little as 3 to 5 feet of total groundwater decline. The Nature Conservancy will be submitting additional written comments, but I really do appreciate your time, and I really do appreciate the department's commitment to public outreach throughout this process. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, for the record, my name is Neil Brandt, and I'm the executive director of the statewide nonprofit Water Watch of Oregon. Our mission is to protect and restore flows in Oregon's rivers for the fish, the wildlife, and the people that depend on healthy rivers to survive. First, I want to thank the department for taking on this critical issue. Water Watch has been a member of the RAC process since the beginning and throughout. Like others here, we have invested significant staff time and effort into this process, and we want to thank the department for the rigor and the strong use of science and data to inform this process throughout. As Justin spoke about at the beginning of this meeting in the informational session, we know that many places in Oregon, including here in the Deschutes, surface and groundwaters are connected. Groundwater is essential to our rivers, streams, lakes, wetlands, springs, and other groundwater-dependent ecosystems that rely on cold, clean groundwater inputs to provide for the fish and wildlife that Oregonians cherish. Here in Oregon, we're lucky to have this 1955 Groundwater Act with its forward-looking standards. Water Watch is very supportive of the department's efforts to finally bring both rules and practice when it comes to groundwater allocation into alignment with the statute with these proposed rules. As we know, our groundwater resources in Oregon are finite. It is critical that we work together to safeguard this resource for fish, wildlife, and people. These proposed rules are the first step toward sustainable groundwater allocation in Oregon into the future, and we'd like to thank you.
Thanks. Lisa Brown, and I'm sorry if I get this wrong, Barry Schullenberger. I think Lisa, you're first.
For the record, Lisa Brown, from Portland, Oregon. I am a staff attorney with Water Watch of Oregon. And to follow our executive director's comments, I want to start just by saying that, the proposed rules align with the 1955 Groundwater Act and with the department's duty to implement the law. And to highlight a few pieces of the rules that we think, the proposed rules that we think are critical. One is defining reasonably stable and better implementing that requirement, at least as to new allocations of groundwater. Better protecting hydraulically connected surface water from pumping impacts. And with that, better protecting senior surface water rights, including the in-stream water rights. And of course, also being more protective of existing domestic wells, which in some parts of the state are the only wells available for drinking water. These improvements are long overdue and critically needed. And under the existing rules, what we've seen is overissuance of groundwater permits that have created just extremely difficult problems across the state, including plummeting groundwater levels as deep as 100 feet or more. And as a member of the RAC that's trying to tackle this in the Harney Basin now, I sort of have a firsthand seat at seeing how hard it is to really address this overallocation once it's happened. So we just think it's critically important to not create this problem in other parts of the state. And I want to say, we have a lot of tools in Oregon to address reasonable water demands without compromising our groundwater and all that it supports. And I think these rules put us on a path to, better utilizing those existing tools. And to make a brief comment about municipal use, particularly in this Central Oregon area, without getting into the data, and we'll address this in our written comments as well. But, when you really look at the data on water use, what you see is that the water demand is really driven by these big summer peaks that are related to outdoor watering that I think is just not climate adapted. So when we really dive into that data, what you see is that two things that really pop out. One is there's an ample amount of water. It just needs to be better used and directed towards household use. And secondly, that there's also a long time horizon to do this when you look at the water rights available. So we'll put some more detailed comments in on that issue. And in the end, I would just thank the department for the effort that went into this rulemaking, the scientific rigor, all of the data that was reviewed, the public process that preceded the RAC, the extensive RAC process, and just really the thorough discussions that we've had. And while we think there are some areas in the rules that could be strengthened, and we will submit comments to that extent, Water Watch is very supportive of this rules package. So thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Barry Schillenberger. I'm Lake County Commissioner. Lake County is just over 8,000 square miles and about the same amount of people. Everyone recognizes that there are certain areas of the state that are experiencing groundwater declines, which need to be better managed. However, the proposed rules are overly broad and would create a de facto moratorium on all new groundwater use in the state, even in areas that are not experiencing issues with groundwater decline. The inability to appropriate available groundwater will harm all sectors and all persons in the state. The proposed rules are essentially a no-growth rule. Because new appropriation from surface water is typically not available, and the proposed rules are now taking groundwater off the table. The one-size-fits-all rule proposed by OWRD will cause more harm than good. The new rules are not good policy because so many alternatives exist to meet the Commission's goal to better manage groundwater in the state, such as Groundwater allocation should be studied and rules should be developed on a basin by basin basis. This process has already begun and legislature directed OWRD in House Bill 2018 and 2021 to study groundwater basins and develop groundwater budgets. OWRD should prioritize basins based on need and adopt rules that are relevant to the actual conditions in such basins. OWRD can use its existing authority to stop potential groundwater overappropriation in certain groundwater basins. OWRD can declare serious water management problem areas to stop further water appropriation and study the groundwater basin. OWRD can reclassify groundwater uses in basin plans to restrict additional uses of groundwater where shortages require. OWRD can also enforce groundwater permit restrictions and shut off conditions that already exist in permits. OWRD can shut off junior groundwater users in favor of senior water right holders when the circumstances permit such regulation. OWRD can deny extensions of time to perfect existing groundwater permits where current conditions cannot support additional development. The proposed rules are a crude and overbroad tool that will end all new groundwater use in the state, thereby harming all industries and inhabitants. Please deny passage of the new rules and address issues with groundwater declines under a more targeted and scientific approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Craig Lacey and Mark Salvo. Start with Craig.
For the record, my name is Craig Lacey. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you all hear him back there? Yep. Okay, we're good.
Been a resident here at Bend for 40 years and been fighting for wild fish and water issues much of that time. I was on the Integrated Water Resource Strategy team in 2012. I am involved in the place-based planning effort in the Lower John Day. I was chairman of the Coalition for the Deschutes when we got the upper Deschutes into the Wild and Scenic Plan and prevented 17 dams being built within 15 miles of Bend. And anyway, we've got a history of working on water issues in the area. I believe the state is correct in developing regulations that will only allow new groundwater permits if it can be proven the area has a stable aquifer and there will be no negative impacts to senior water right holders or nearby streams or springs. My main concern is that hydrologic change is outpacing our ability to analyze and respond to it. The amount of data we currently collect on water use and ecological needs is far from what is necessary to properly manage the water resources owned by the people of the state of Oregon. Here's a quote from the 2012 Integrated Water Resource Strategy. Oregon needs to fill the knowledge gap, gathering, processing, and sharing water resource information so that the state can better characterize its water resources for economic development and a healthy environment. This includes taking a look at the interaction between groundwater and surface water and furthering our understanding of the limits on our water supplies and systems. Idaho had a groundwater problem in the northeast part of the state. They began a system of measuring all water uses, including the depth of wells, and reporting it to the state. It was so successful in aiding management of the resource, they applied this system to the entire state. What I'm saying is Idaho requires the reporting of all water use in the state. And the groundwater part of that is The director may require all water right holders and designated management areas to report withdrawals of groundwater for the purpose of assisting him in determining available groundwater supplies and their uses. It's Title 42, Chapter 2. All appropriations of public water of the state of Idaho are required to measure their diversions, including the depth of their wells. So, in order to determine available groundwater supplies in Oregon, much more information is needed. In areas where there are already aquifer depletions, the state should require monthly or more frequent reporting to provide the most accurate assessment of water demand. I know you're not answering questions today, but my question is, what percent of permitted wells in the state of Oregon does Oregon Water Resource Department have certified data on? And my guess is it's less than 1% of the wells in the state do they have accurate data on their wells. It's impossible to manage something like water without accurate measurement. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's everybody that signed up. Is there anybody else that oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I was looking at my checklist. I'm sorry, Mark. Sorry. No. So sorry. Go ahead.
All right.
That's because you switched spots on me. That's why.
Throw you a curveball.
Yeah, you did. I'm so sorry.
Good evening. My name is Mark Salvo. I'm Conservation Director for Oregon Natural Desert Association. ONDA's mission is to protect, defend, and restore millions of acres of public lands in Oregon's high desert. We maintain offices here in Bend and Portland and represent more than 18,000 members and supporters who contribute their time, talent, and funds to ensuring a future for Oregon's dry side. It is on their behalf that our organization supports the Oregon Water Resources Department's scientific and data-driven approach to updating its policies to conserve and sustain groundwater resources. Seeps, springs, wetlands, creeks, and streams are the lifeblood of Oregon's desert. Fish, wildlife, and watersheds are utterly dependent on these rare desert waters, many of which are inextricably connected to area aquifers. Water resources will become even more critical in the high desert as climate change warms and dries this environment. In fact, Oregon's high desert is warming faster than most of the rest of the country. For these reasons, we are supportive of the department defining reasonably stable groundwater levels and formulating rules that will be protective of hydrologically connected surface water. In fact, beyond what is currently proposed, we would like to see a requirement that the state examine the impacts of any new application on groundwater-dependent surface waters, such as seeps, springs, and wetlands, to ensure that any new permit would not have adverse consequences for these vital components of desert ecosystems. Importantly, updating Oregon's allocation rules to sustain groundwater and connected surface waters will have salutary benefits on other state priorities in Eastern Oregon, including conservation and recovery of imperiled species, management of fire and climate resilient landscapes, and continued sustainable economic development throughout the region. In this way, the new groundwater management regulation can serve as a foundation to support other local, federal, and state investment and implementation of an array of conservation and economic programs across a huge proportion of the state. So for that reason, thank you again for your work on this important new rule.
Thank you. I'm sorry again. I wanted to check in and see if Paul Lipscomb, who had signed up to give comments, is here and wishes. Okay. All right. Is there anybody else that wishes to provide comments? Okay. So we have to stick around until 9 because that's what's in the notice. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pause the recording and wait around and see if anybody shows up and wants to provide comments. Okay, it's now 9 o'clock on April 4th, 2024. We've had no other members of the public who have wished to enter any comments into the record. So we're going to conclude the hearing at this time. Thank you for coming and providing us with your comments. The hearing is adjourned.